everyone, and welcome back to my studio. So I know it's a little rough out there right now, guys, but I hope that my channel can at least provide you with a few minutes to de-stress and just enjoy some art. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I went ahead and refined my process for this piece and for future pieces to come. Now, the first step in this process for me is the rough sketch. I like to do the rough sketch in my actual sketchbook, and that was what you saw at the very beginning when she had no hair and just kind of the cloth wrapped around her, because I think it allows me to actually be a little bit more loose. And when I get into Procreate, which is what you're seeing now, I tend to want to be like very precise and only use the symmetry tool, which I probably use way too much, but I enjoy the perfect balance so much that I can't not use it. So I like to start with a very loose sketch, something just very soft and unrefined, and then when I go into Procreate I can refine the lines and then plan out the colors. Now, I'm sure someone out there is wondering why, if you are planning to paint this traditionally, would you do a digital color test? And that's actually because it's just faster. And it's easier to play around with color theory and decide, do I want this to be a very exciting piece or do I want it to be more tranquil? Now, the next step in this process would be preparing the painting surface. Now, in this case, that means sanding down the wooden plaque and then transferring the image onto it. So I use a soft pastel to rub on the back of the sheet, and then I trace over it with a pen or a pencil so it leaves behind the image on the wood. After that, I can just use the guide left behind to fill in any line work with ink. And you can see actually here that the ink bled out quite a bit in certain areas. I think that was a combination of the sandpaper that I was using not being the correct grit, it was too low of a grit, and when I was pressing into the paper to leave behind the transfer, I may have dug a little too deeply with the pen that I was using, so there was actually a valley for the ink to pool in, and then it spread even further than I wanted it to. To fix this issue, I just sanded it down one more time after all the lines were in, and I went into the painting process. Now, if we go back for a moment to where I was talking about color testing, you can see here in the digital render along the top and right side border the primary colors that I chose for her overall skin, as well as all the other surrounding colors. I kept this image pulled up next to me on my phone so I could make sure that I wasn't taking my colors too far. If you're someone who's not familiar with working on wood, this is when I would recommend that you have a piece of wood that is the same porosity. This is a Birchwood Plaque from Michael's. So you want to have a piece of something the same or similar nearby so you can test your colors and know how they'll be altered according to the base color of the wood or how high the absorption rate is. In this case, I knew that I could use the light warm tone of the wood as a good base for her skin, and then I could just add bits of red and yellow to give it some life, and the blue and purple I used for shading. And then for the rest of the illustration, which I wanted to be very cool, I basically just kept a heavier ratio of pigment to water, whereas with the skin it was much more diluted so that that warmth wouldn't be too overpowering or distracting. And if you've watched my videos before, you know how important it is to be very careful with the amount of water you apply to wood, because it is porous, some even more so than watercolor paper. It absorbs and leaches into other areas, so you have to kind of be able to predict when that's going to happen and how you'd like to use it. Now, as usual, along with my Winsor & Newton watercolors and my Micron pens, I also went in with a little bit of white gouache, also by Winsor & Newton. just because honestly I feel like the white that comes in a watercolor palette is pretty much useless, doesn't give you really any pigment, and I wanted her to have white hair with like a blue underglow, and I was not achieving that with the white watercolor, so I used gouache in her hair as well as along the lines for the bubbles and the water in the background. Oh, and also on any of the pearls or like white accents in her jewelry. This next supply you're probably also pretty familiar with. It's my Finetec Mica watercolor palette. As you can see, I'm running super low on silver and one of the gold colors that I apparently use all the time. I've been considering, since my birthday's coming up, I've been considering getting myself a new palette, but it's one of many things that are on the list that I don't necessarily have the money for. Around here is where I decided to start refining the line work, and when I was looking back at the digital render, I really loved how soft the blue line art looked, so I wanted to give her that same softness, so I went in with it. I was using two pens actually. It was my Prismacolor blue ink pen and my Micron blue pen. I kept switching back and forth just because the wood seems to really dry out these pens, so when one would dry out I would switch to another one and like let it rest, so it was just going back and forth. I should warn that the Prisma fineliners are not necessarily waterproof. They can be reactivated, but it does say that they are archival and light fast, so they shouldn't fade. So I just had to be very careful with the amount of water that I was placing next to anywhere that had used the Prismacolor marker as opposed to the Micron. The Micron pens are completely water resistant, and I've never had an issue with a Micron bleeding because I had water on top of it once it was dry. One of the last steps for this piece was to darken the border. I really like the natural color of this wood, but I felt like there just wasn't enough contrast between the border and just the actual illustration, so I wanted to add a little bit of depth there. And here's actually where I go in with the Diamond Glaze water-based dimensional adhesive. I actually found this at the bead store where I picked up the gems for this collection of pieces that I'm doing. The associate there assured me that it would bond the stones to wood, and I could actually also seal the stone with it as well, so it wouldn't damage or discolor the pearl, and it would protect it from the elements, which is what I needed. Next up, in order to preserve my precious watercolors, I used some of Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay India inks. I went with just the plain brown, and I mixed in some yellow in order to add, again, more depth to the border. The India inks are also light fast and waterproof, so they won't fade over time, and I was able to achieve the contrast that I was looking for. Lastly, in regards to inspiration for this piece, now that I work from home, I'm free to rewatch Avatar: The Last Airbender, Dragon Prince, and Steven Universe just on repeat. So I took a lot of inspiration from those shows, as well as a lot of the knowledge that I already have for gemstone mythology. I went ahead and wrote out kind of the mythology that I pulled together for pearls specifically, and for each piece that I do in this series, I'll also be attaching kind of a little write-up for each stone. Representative of purity, innocence, and prosperity, pearls are associated with water and the realm of emotions. They remind us to be patient through emotional turmoil, and that dedication will see us through. They stimulate the mind and are said to attract prosperity, intuition, and psychic sensitivity. Saltwater pearls also have the added benefit of purification. As always, I just want to say thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that by looking at the steps I take in my process, you can kind of pick out the things that will help you with yours. Before I considered this piece fully and completely done, I went ahead and created a digital line art coloring page, as well as refined the full color digital rendering to give as gifts to my Patreon members. And don't forget, if you sign up for the Lotus tier or higher before 5 p.m. on April 10th, my birthday, you'll get a special logo sticker along with all of your Patreon rewards. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in a couple of weeks for the next video. Bye!